I'm Tracy Trouten. I am, Doug's daughter and youngest child, and also went to Northwestern and had him as the chair of my department, which was both really handy and kind of weird at times. Magic was always one of Dad's favorite hobbies. He taught me my first card trick when I was 5, my first coin sleight a couple years later. As the youngest in my family, by the time I learned any particular move, my brothers had already known it for some time, so I became very frustrated that I could never do a trick they didn't know. So, when I was 9, my dad walked into Twin Cities Magic and Costume and bought me a trick and gave Fred, the proprietor of the shop, strict orders to never sell it to my brothers. I still have that trick, and my brothers still don't know how it works. Dad and I always connected best when he was teaching me about something. He was always a teacher long before he was a professor. He taught me magic tricks as soon as I could get them. He taught me the Pythagorean theorem when I was in 3rd grade. I don't remember why, but we were out at a restaurant and he decided it was time. Like his father before him, he taught me that straws work because the pressure of the air on the surface of the pop in the bottle will push the pop up the straw if first you remove the air from the straw. In high school, I barely had to study for my American government class, thanks to years of watching West Wing with my dad. Because you don't just watch a show with my dad. He will pause, and he'll turn to you and go, "Okay, so what's a filibuster?" And then there are the things that he taught me indirectly, by example. He taught me to investigate and research, ask questions, and study further. Always fact check, even if you're inclined to believe something. He taught me that thoughtful inquiry was more important than looking smart. You should never take yourself too seriously. Humor will get you much further than serious debate, and work ethic always wins over raw talent. Perhaps most importantly, Dad taught me that critical thinking and faith are not mutually exclusive, but in fact, like the Bereans, will lead to a faith more deeply rooted. Understanding how magic works has never made me less impressed. I still marvel as a skilled magician flawlessly executes a trick. And the same is true about faith, about God and salvation and miracles. The more deeply I understand it, the more I examine and research and question, the more I see the skill of our Creator and how he sets things in motion long before the culmination, or the reveal, if you will. In magic, when something is destroyed, it will be restored. When something disappears, it will reappear. To us, it looks like my dad is gone, his body destroyed by cancer, and his soul disappeared from the earth. But this is just the first part of the trick. And someday, we'll get to see that he has reappeared restored in the presence of his Savior. Thank you. And now on to something much lighter. My dad was famous for top 10 lists, so I thought it would be remiss of me to not include one. So this is a list of top 10 Doug Trouten quotes as submitted by former students, and then I threw in a couple other fun ones that people should just know exist. So number 10, a quiz question when he was the director of the Evangelical Press Association. The Evangelical Press Association is A, the coolest group in Christendom, B, led by a truly remarkable man, C, a group I hope to be involved with someday, or D, all of the above. Number 9, on Deal or No Deal. We've gone from Jeopardy, where it's who was the 3rd king of Prussia, to 9? You're picking numbers? Not too long and we'll have a show dedicated to flipping coins. Number 8. When I was in college, movies were sin, but rock music was not. Then the year after I graduated, they changed it to movies were no longer sin, but rock music was, which makes you think they picked stuff out of a hat. This year, the color blue is sin. Number 7, dear God, thank you, it's Friday, and we can almost leave. Number 6, regarding the program War of the Worlds, I don't think it ever led to legislation, which is weird, since everything in our country does. Number 5, this was a conversation between my mother and my dad in the car. We were preparing a meal, and one of the ingredients was duck fat. So Mom goes, "Where did you get duck fat?" Dad goes, "Amazon." And she's like, no, but where do they get it from? ducks. There may be some intermediary steps. Number 4, I love TV, but I hate that I love TV. When I think about all the hours I've spent watching TV, I realize I could have mastered the French language by now. Then I realize I have no burning desire to talk to someone from France. Number 3, we have reached the end of where you read the book for assignments. For some of you, this isn't a big change. Number 2, there is such a thing as a stupid question, but ask anyway. And number 1 said fairly recently, we're not made for this world. We will all die at some point. My best used by date is just a little bit more obvious, but I was never under the illusion that I was immortal, and that helps.
My name is Brad Johnson, and I think some of you might know me. Those who don't, you're in a better place. I think it's ironic that I'm allowed to speak up here because of all the people in Doug's world. Doug had this immense love of brevity, and that's not my calling card. So when I talked to Melissa, I asked, how much time do I have? And she said, well, how much time do you need? And I said, well, I've got about an hour and a half worth of material. I think I can maybe edit it down to about 45 minutes. And she gave me a horrified look and said, I don't think that's going to work. So here we go. I just have a few minutes, and that's appropriate because Doug, like I said, Doug always loved brevity. Let's get to the point. So I have several stories about Doug. I have some might say dubious distinction of actually, I think I've known Doug longer than anyone in this room. I met him the summer. Doug and I are exactly the same age. We went to school at the same time. A lot of our experiences are the same. I met Doug the summer after 4th grade. And I did some math on this. In the summer of 1969, which would be 50 years ago this year. We met at summer Big Sandy Bible Camp up in McGregor, Minnesota. We were both Alliance kids, raised in the Christian Missionary Alliance. Doug's dad, I think at the time, was a teacher at St. Paul Bible College, which became Crown College, and later became one of the interim presidents of the college. And to make a long story short, Doug was in my cabin that first year in 1969. And if you know anything about young boys, you know that we test our mettle. And I was certainly one of those boys who wanted to test my mettle. And I found another boy in the cabin who was willing to test mettle with me. And I think we were maybe disagreeing about who was going to sweep the floor. And I suspect because my mom taught me how to do that, I knew how to do that, and I was going to do that. And so I think I was grabbing the broom from this other camper, who actually went on later to go to, which becomes another story, which we don't have time for. And we're kind of jockeying for this thing, pushing each other back and forth. And Doug had just gone to the canteen and was sitting in his corner bunk bed with his treats. I don't remember what they were, maybe potato chips and something chocolate, maybe, I'm just guessing. And I don't remember exactly what Doug said because my memory's not that good, but those of you who know Doug could imagine what a 10-year-old Doug might say. Needless to say, he put us in our place and we stopped doing what we were doing. A little bit like as if we were chastised, but we didn't really realize it. We weren't quite smart enough to realize what exactly had happened. Because he had a really great way of twisting things in very interesting ways. He was a master of language even at that age. Had a couple years after that, a couple summers, I met him again at Big Sandy Bible Camp, probably the next summer and then the following summer. Lost contact with Doug because I think his family had moved abroad and been doing some other things. Fast forward to 1977, and I show up for my freshman year at Crown College with no less than Doug Trouten. I was thinking a lot about what kinds of things occurred during that time. And one of the first things I remember about Doug in our freshman year is we both had jobs working in food service. We washed the dishes. Back in those days, you'd get a job on campus, just like some of you have on this campus. And it was a work-study program. And I got a job washing dishes, and Doug did too. And the reason why I mention this is because as I think back, we had a great time. Doug always had a way of making things seem interesting. Even the mundane could be interesting because he could take words and twist them and make them mean and do other things. But I want to address his character. There were days when the shifts would get long and we'd be tired of washing dishes and we'd be tired of cleaning things. And okay, let's just be done. And Doug would make sure that we finished squeegeeing the floor, and he was a responsible person, and he wanted to make sure that we did the right thing. And I always admired that because it spoke to his integrity. One thing we know about Doug, he was a man of great integrity. I think Ann Sorensen said it once to me that one thing that she loved about Doug was the fact that he was always the same no matter who he was with and what room he was in. And in 1977, that freshman Doug was the same Doug that you know now, that guy who has character and integrity. Fast forward maybe a year or so, I was always good friends with Doug's roommates. And Doug had interesting roommates and interesting friends, to say the least. Those of you who know him know that. One of Doug's roommates, John, I was in visiting John, and he said, "Here, take a look at this." And he grabbed about a 14-page paper that Doug had just finished writing for, I think it was a composition class. He said, "Read this." So I'm sitting there and I'm flipping through it. And people, it was amazing. It was so well written. He actually did something that I couldn't even imagine. He took something that you knew to be factual and using logic turned it upside down and made it seem like it was completely non-factual, using this impeccable logic. And it was unbelievable. And it was really wonderful for me to read because at the end, the idea was that people can twist things and make things be something else. And I thought many years later how appropriate that this man turned into be a journalist because he knew the tricks. He knew the tricks that you could use and abuse and how you could abuse and use language. And he demonstrated it just very skillfully in that class. Fast forward another year, and I was hanging out for whatever reason in the student newspaper office. And Doug and Liz by now were hanging out together. So Doug and Liz were kind of an item, and they seemed to fit together pretty well. So, we were happy for Doug and we were happy for Liz. Having said that, a lot of people do not know that Doug is a fantastic musician. He's a great singer. He was in a college choir all the time. He was in groups. He was a great bass, and I was a bass, so it always stunk for me because he was a better bass than me. So he got in all the cool groups, and I had to get in the other groups that were. So that's a whole nother story I don't have time for. But we sing in choir together, and that was great. Doug was actually teaching himself Jim Croce's song, I think it was Time in a Bottle. And he was teaching himself on the guitar, and he had a good enough ear that he could hear it, and he kind of figured it out. And the other day I was playing it on the guitar for my kids, or my grandson, and I just realized, oh my gosh, I learned this song from Doug. He taught me this song, and he taught me how to do it. And it's funny because he was a teacher then, just like you said. This was college. He taught me how to do this, and he figured it out. And he's like, "Oh yeah, it goes like this," and I'm like, "Yeah, okay, we're right on time." So At any rate, fast forward another year or so, I heard, I'd been involved, I started getting into the recording business, and I'd been involved in a recording called, a group called Potter's Clay. We did a record, and it would have been probably, I think, my junior or senior year. And I heard that Doug was going to do a review of this record for the student newspaper. And I thought, oh boy, I'm not sure how this is going to go, because Doug would, if he didn't like it, this could be bad news for us. And I learned another thing about Doug, is Doug was completely honest in his assessment of this album, but yet he was kind. And I thought, how can you do that? That's pretty amazing. I was always amazed by that. It was a kind review, and because we gave it the old college try, right? We're in college doing this thing, and it was really a wonderful thing. Turned out to be a good thing. Fast forward, I knew he got a job in journalism, and I'd see him a couple of times at church. I watched him, his kids were little, and then I didn't see him for many years. Fast forward to 2004, I get a job here at the college, and I show up and I meet Doug in the hallway. He said, "Oh gosh, it's you. You got hired." And he said, "Well, if I'd have known it was you, I would have talked to somebody." I said, "Good thing you didn't, because I'm here." So I thought that was pretty great. One of the things, though, that you probably don't know about Doug, eventually became my supervisor, and he was actually a great boss. He was the kind of a manager that you would really aspire to be. He understood. He was technical enough to understand my job, but he was also strong enough to understand when I needed to be reined in, and he also knew when to let me do what I do. He understood that intrinsically and also intellectually. So I think because of his intelligence, a lot of times we think of him as the smartest guy in the room, and he was. But he was also really great at applying what he knew to get something done, whatever that was, which is one of the things that we had in common in our life before we started teaching. The greatest compliment, though, that I think that Doug ever paid me was not something he said, and I think it's ironic. It's something that he didn't say to me. We were talking probably a few years ago just about our life, and we were talking about something that happened in college. And he said, "You remember when this happened?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember that." He said, "You remember when this happened?" And I said, "Yeah, I remember that." And I said, "Do you remember when this happened?" He said, "Yeah, I remember that." And I said, "You remember when this happened?" He said, "Yeah, I remember that." And he said to me, "I don't think we were friends then, were we?" And I said, "No, I don't think we were." And he looked at me in the eye. And I realized we'd crossed that bridge. We'd become friends. And it was a great honor for me, because he was a man of integrity and honesty. And the fact that he would be my friend meant a lot to me.
Good evening. My name is Jeremy Kowinska. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities here at University of Northwestern, and that includes the Department of Communication, where Doug Trouten worked for the past 19 years. It was my privilege to share some of the thoughts I'll share with you tonight at Doug's memorial service a few weeks ago, and also I shared some of these thoughts with our faculty at the opening faculty meeting. At Doug's service, we got to see the many facets of his life, not just what we knew here at Northwestern. We got to hear from his student days at St. Paul Bible College, where he developed some lifelong friendships with fellow members of the custodial crew. We learned about his time as editor of the Minnesota Christian Chronicle and his service as the Evangelical Press Association's executive director. What I'm going to remember most about the service was that we witnessed the spiritual legacy that he left behind in the eulogy that we just heard from Tracy, the gospel-saturated sermon from his son Luke, and also to see David there, who's a living answer to prayer. It was a really powerful thing to see and witness. We also learned about Doug's fairly serious interest in magic, something that I had only recently discovered when I walked into a personnel committee meeting early and he had a deck of cards out and those quickly disappeared. So it was like magic. So I met Doug 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, when I interviewed here. I interviewed for a chair position in the music department, and Doug was the chair of the communication department. And when I came, he kind of took me under his wing and showed me how things worked here in the systems and helped me navigate the culture in my first few months. And over the years, we discovered that we had some things in common. In addition to being a bass singer, Doug was also a tuba player, and low brass instruments happened to be my specialty, so we talked about that. We also shared a love for an obscure, quirky Canadian sitcom called Corner Gas. And I earned major street cred with Doug when I revealed that I had stumbled onto the abandoned set of Dog River, where the show was set, in rural Saskatchewan during a family vacation. So if you want to go visit it, it's been torn down, but there are some tour markers, but I got to walk through there. So Doug was really impressed by that. And the last few weeks I've been thinking just how much the show's character, Wanda, reminds me of a female version of Doug. So if any of you ever watch that show, just keep that in mind when you see Wanda on your screen. If you spend any time with Doug, you were most certainly exposed to his very dry and wry wit. And he used that sense of humor to gently or not so gently make a point, or to lower the tension in a room. But if you've been to his Facebook page, you realize that he used his humor as a way to advance truth or expose error. As dean the last few years, I worked very closely with Doug on several university committees. And as I've said before, committee work is the punchline of many jokes at every school, not just here at Northwestern. And Doug often recounted his service on the Committee on Committees, which was an actual committee formed here at Northwestern to deal with the number of committees we had. And I think every personnel committee meeting, the first meeting of the year, started with that story. And despite the jokes and barbs he aimed at committee service, Doug was very good at it. He had a journalist's ability to research a topic or a question, to understand all the perspectives or points of view, and then he had an editor's ability to distill things down to its very essence, then write it up with concise and accurate prose. And he always made his first draft on one of those little skinny journalist notebooks, and that always seemed to appear out of nowhere, out of his back pocket. And so now that I know about this magic thing, I think I know how that appeared so quickly and seamlessly. As we've launched this new academic year, I've thought a lot about Doug because his editorial fingerprints are on many of the documents we use around here. So for the faculty in the room, Doug had a lot of input on the academic program advisory committee process, which we developed about 4 years ago. The new faculty evaluation process and forms had a lot of his input. The new department and school promotion criteria guidelines and the entire format were something that he came up with. And many of the faculty handbook changes that we've approved in faculty meetings were things that Doug edited in our meetings. So I've been thinking a lot about him this year as we've launched. But students are at the core of our mission here, and Doug loved you, students, and he loved to teach. And with the help and support from his wife, Liz, who drove him to work the last few months, and from his colleagues in the communication department, Wendy and Kent and others who stepped in to fill in his classes when he wasn't feeling well, Doug was able to teach right up through the end of last semester. And in all that time, he was dealing with the effects of the cancer and his treatments. He was the faculty advisor for our student newspaper, The Examiner, formerly The Column, and I think it is very fitting that the Examiner's staff received an Evangelical Press Association Award of Merit just this last spring. So congratulations to both them and to the memory of Doug. So Liz and Tracy and also to Luke and David, I just want to extend you our condolences. And thank you for sharing your husband and your father with us for 19 years. And we're going to miss him too.
I'm going to start with a reading from the book God is No Fool by Lois Lowry. Bits and pieces. Bits and pieces. People important to you, people unimportant to you, cross your life, touch it with love and carelessness, and move on. There are people who leave you and you breathe a sigh of relief and wonder why you ever came into contact with them. There are people who leave you and you breathe a sigh of remorse and wonder why they had to go away and leave such a gaping hole. Children leave parents, friends leave friends, acquaintances move on. People change homes, people grow apart, enemies hate and move on. Friends love and move on. You think on the many who have moved on into your hazy memory. You look on those present and you wonder. I believe in God's master plan in lives. He moves people in and out of each other's lives and leaves his mark on the other. You find that you are made up of the bits and pieces of all who ever touched your life, and that you are more because of it, and you would be less if they had not touched you. Pray God that you accept the bits and pieces in humility and wonder and never question and never regret. Bits and pieces. Dr. Trouten was the very first person that I met at the University of Northwestern. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Victoria Downey, and I am a senior public relations and communications major. But before I was a college senior, I was a freshman who did not want to go to college. Yet one bright, hot day in an office in the 4th floor NAS, after driving up to Northwestern in the middle of the summer and crying the whole way up, in an office that he immediately said was not his because his would never be this messy, which I learned was not true. I found myself sitting across from Trouten as we pieced together my schedule. As we struggled to get my fine arts credit to fit, he explained, "The music department is rather agnostic. To be honest, they know that the rest of the school exists, but I don't think they care." Immediately, I was put at ease, reminded not to take myself too seriously, and soon realized that if I didn't pay close attention, his wisdom and quick wit would pass me by. You can't hide when you have a class with Trouten. In fact, I only got involved in the paper because a paper that I turned in my first month of school where I told a story. We were explaining our experiences with media growing up. And I told a story of when I was 13, and I convinced my dad to let me go see the Hunger Games because I don't know where I got this. I told him that Katniss volunteering to replace her sister's spot in this competition was just like Jesus volunteering to take our place in the lives of redemption and things that we missed. It was not good. It wasn't very good. But Trouten emailed me a 2-sentence email that said, "This is strong. You're writing for the paper." Okay. Every time I would try to sneak out, he would find me and ask me to get involved again. I was privileged to know Trouten through 3 years on the editorial staff of the paper, numerous classes, learning that his oldest son had worked with my oldest brother and numerous cousins at Grindstone Lake Bible Camp, a little camp north of here, and from the tuba playing mentioned, he had played the tuba in a marching band competition in my small Iowa hometown when he was in high school. And he would throw in the occasional casual Twin Peak reference into class discussions. In fact, if you knew Trouten, as his daughter mentioned, you knew that he was the king of references and recommendations. Often in conversation, an abstract reference to a TV show or a book he had read crept in, leading myself and a friend to start a shared note on our phones titled, "Things that Trouten recommends we watch when we have a free night." But more than silly movies about parking lots and alternative universes, I do recommend the Parking Lot documentary, actually. It's really good. He was challenging us to think. He would sit in the silence of a classroom the way that teachers do when they're straining to get a discussion started and wait for us to start it ourselves, encouraging us to articulate and strengthen our ideas and our predisposed notions on any topic, not letting us hide in the corners, but shining a spotlight on us and bringing us to the forefront of a discussion. That's how I saw him and how I think he was, thinking. He challenged his students and colleagues to become sharper thinkers and better people. better writers and better readers and citizens and better learners and better teachers and better friends, better people. Not because it could get us somewhere or lead us to the next big thing or get us an interview at a job we thought we understood, but because it was worth doing. And he trusted us to trust ourselves enough to do what we needed to do to succeed. There are many things that we take for granted in life, but may we never overlook those closest to us who challenge us and encourage us to grow, or a God who persistently invites us closer to himself. Death is the most final thing that we experience this side of heaven. Grief and mourning are not linear, but are staggered and sporadic and impossible to pin down. So, as we mourn, we know that we do not mourn as those who have no hope, but still we mourn. Just as we are collections of those that we've met and been impacted by in the past, we all have the distinct privilege of carrying the bits and pieces of Trouten with us through our memories, through our wit, through our underlining kindness and our passion for the truth. May we all work to live up to the honor. As we listen this evening to the stories that we share, I invite each of you to take a deep breath, shake your shoulders into your chair a little bit, and take in where we are. Listen and laugh, and shed a few tears and listen a little bit more. Most of all, don't be afraid to join in the conversation. And remember that if Trouten was in the room, he may very well have looked at you and said, "Victoria, something's on your mind. What are you thinking about?"
Hello, I'm Melissa Clutter. I'm the office assistant in the communication department. I had the honor of being hired by Doug and Lauren 5 years ago, and it was the most amazing blessing that's happened in my life. We're going to move into a time of sharing memories of Doug, talking about his character, things that you've shared with him, stories about Doug. We would just ask that you would keep your stories short so that we could hear as many stories as possible in the limited time that we have. We're so grateful for all of you being here, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say about Doug. So if anyone wants to come up, we'll just take turns sharing stories, and then as time runs out, we'll move on to the next thing.
Well, I didn't want to come up, but I do have a story, and I think I can do it in the 60 seconds. You may not know, this is one of those, you may not know this Doug story, but early on when we would be talking about students and papers and research, and he told me that in an effort to show them the unreliability of Wikipedia, do you know where I'm heading? Okay, some of you do already. The unreliability of Wikipedia, he would direct his students to look up Northwestern College, where they would learn that it was founded by Jesus, which was a fact that Doug himself had added to Wikipedia. They caught on and took it off, and it's never appeared again, but Doug put it there.
Okay, I have to follow up on that one because he would do this every year, and another year it was that it's a magical land filled with leprechauns and unicorns. He did this often enough that the Northwestern page was locked for editing, and Wikipedia just went, "Nope, this is it. We're done." I did want to tell one story about I had one class with my dad, which was mass media. It was the only class that there wasn't really another option for. I mean, like we talked about it, whether it would be okay or not, because having your daughter in your class can be a little weird. And most of the students knew that I was his daughter, and most of the students knew that I still lived at home. And then one day in a class discussion, there was something about millennials don't move out of their homes as soon and whatever. And I was, I think, 25 at this point, and some girl who didn't know who I was or who I lived with, said something about, anyone who's 23 and still living with their parents is just a loser, da 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 da. And the silence and my dad, he didn't give away who I was. He just, in his classic way, he said something about, he said some flippant remark that kind of put her in her place and let us move on. But it was just great to have, I could feel everyone turn and look at me. And it was like, do you know okay. So, but I really enjoyed having him as a teacher for that one class, and like I said before, I really enjoyed, every once in a while there'd be a thing where I'd say, I need to do this thing, and he goes, well, either your advisor or your department chair needs to sign off on that. So I think your department chair is gonna be okay with it.
Hello, my name is Hannah Gullickson. I was a student of Doug Trouten, and I was the feature editor on a couple of the years at the Northwestern Examiner. But first, I was an English major, and then I added the journalism minor my junior year. But the reason for that was my mom had decided that professional writing would be good for me to have that as a career while I pursued creative writing. And I'll never forget when I first sat in Doug Trouten's office, I had already sent him a detailed email reasoning why I wanted to add the minor. And I remember him looking down the email, then looking up at me, and he's like, why? And he said it in a way where he was questioning why I was adding the journalism minor. It wasn't just flippant. But I felt that on a personal note, all the journalism classes he took and my experience as the editor helped me become a better writer. As a better creative writer, the brevity actually gave me the directness and the strength that actually some of the other creative classes. Actually, I probably would never have been as good of a writer if it hadn't been for some of those journalism classes. But I also remember him saying, if I took the professional writing and then the creative, he said, you can make money while writing the next great American novel. So I definitely cherished him. And so thank you, Trouten family, for him. So thank you.
My name is Jenny Savek. I am a senior multimedia journalism major here, and Dr. Trouten was my advisor through these last couple years of college, and it's been just such a privilege to work with him and get to know him. And I'm also going to be the executive editor of the Examiner this year, and that is not something I ever thought I would say. I did not want to do anything more than a staff writer when I came in here, and I just remember he was always so interested to hear what all of us students were thinking about and what we wanted to write about, and always so willing to go with our crazy ideas and refine them into something that was actually tangible. And I have been thinking a lot about what I want to say, how I want to remember Dr. Trouten, because I have the gift of speaking for way too long, and anyone who knows me can know that. But he really taught me a lot about get to the point and say it honestly, and you don't need to embellish it with all these fancy words. And out of all of the lessons that I have learned in his classes, that is probably one of the ones that's going to stick with me the most, not just in my writing and in my speaking, but in my life in general, of just be honest and be brief. And I don't think I've ever met anyone who has more of a gift of that than him, and someone who can do it as kindly and as godly as he does. So I'm very grateful for him, and we miss him a lot.
This is the year that we lost Billy Graham, and we're probably going to lose Luis Palau, and we lost Doug. And when I think about those three men and what they have delivered to the Christian world about Christ and his love for us, about having integrity and speaking the truth, speaking out against injustice and dishonesty. And I know a lot of people didn't appreciate his Facebook pages, but at our house we cheered. I won't do that to you, but we did. We cheered because we knew that he could tell the truth. He could look through the baloney, and he could point it out. And I was on the house cleaning crew. I'm one of his brothers. I know I'm the wrong sex, but I am his brother. And he filled such a hole in my life and took me in as his friend. and made me feel special, made us brothers feel special. And so I know one thing after the service last month, we were all mad because he never led us in devotions. And that's what we heard from the kids who spoke at the funeral is what great devotions he led you all in. And so we're so glad that you had him and that we as a generation knew Doug Trouten. And I am praying that the kids here are rising up and they're going to be a Doug Trouten or Elise Palau or Billy Graham and tell the world about Christ and remind them about honesty and justice and caring and love. So, thanks.
My name's David Gregory. Doug convinced me to be a journalism major my freshman year, and I spent the next 3 years trying to make him see what a mistake he'd made. I had a lot of classes with Doug, a lot of great memories, a lot of teachable moments. But the thing that stood out to me most about my time at Northwestern was not the time in the classroom with Doug, but the time out of the classroom, the time that Doug would take with his entire column staffs and have us over to the house with Doug and Liz and open up their homes. And for 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds, just figuring out how to live in the world and be adults and be Christians and be humans. Doug modeled journalism really, really well to us. But more than that, I think for me, he modeled how to be a man and how to be a person and how to be a Christian. And both Doug and Liz shepherded those staffs through adolescence and through college. And so we're just so indebted to both of you.
Hi. Doug was my advisor, and he was also the first person I met when I visited campus and decided this is what I want to do. And my favorite class that I had with him, he taught pretty much all of my classes, which was such a blessing. In writing for mass media, he had all of his students read the first page of the Star Tribune every weekday for the entirety of the semester. And before then, I hated being informed because that meant people would ask me questions and I'd have to answer them and form opinions. Like, for some reason, I know a lot of people my age, we don't like to form opinions because that means someone else is wrong. But I learned through Doug that you can't inform others or teach others or work well with others if you're not informed. And you can't expect others to understand you if you don't understand them. And that was probably the biggest blessing I've had coming to school here. I love being informed, and I love the fact that he wanted the young people in his life to be informed, and he forced us to be informed, which sometimes you got to do that to us. So that was my best memory of him, and I'm going to take that with me for the rest of my life.
I will undoubtedly get lost as I tried to, I guess, say this, because I even drove up today not knowing if I wanted to tell the full story, full impact of Doug on my life, because it's complicated and it's a little interesting with the whole Northwestern bit. But Doug saw a talented writer in me. I always knew I wanted to be a journalist or a radio broadcaster, so I did both when I was here. And just love the communication department. I think one of the sad things was how disconnected the building was from the rest of the campus, because a lot of people got robbed from what he was able to give just because of how Mel Johnson-centric he was, at least when I was here. One of the things I was not was good at doing homework. I find later in my life there were a lot of things I could have made that easier on myself on, but at the end of every semester, there was always this conversation of, got a lot of incompletes, still waiting on a few things. I was like, I know, I'm going to get it to you, I swear. And he's like, you know, it's most of my talks with Doug came in like two phrases with a kind of a breath in between. And now that I'm a parent, I actually feel really bad because I know how frustrating that probably was for him. But, you know, you get the line of, you know, the thing about homework, you have to do it. And he goes, you know, I know you can, I know you understand what this is, but, well, there's this thing with academics where I have to prove it in some sort of grade book, so I need something. So it's like, and, you know, he and I worked through that, and to be completely honest, and this is where it gets a little bit messy and where I don't tell the full story on it a lot, but I should have failed. I should have been kicked out of school, because if he had gone to the letter of the law with that, with all capabilities, I would not have remained academically eligible here. And he even sat me down once. He said, well, I could fail you. Frankly, I should fail you. I think you'd get something from that, but I know you can write, so that seems a little silly. So, Luke, I don't necessarily know what to do with you. You can hand these in, and you need to. You're going to get a D. If it's anywhere close to good, you're going to get a D. I was like, that's fair. And I ended up graduating on 1 foot, flying through here with a 2.57, basically, just because this was a struggle of mine throughout all my academics. And with him being for most of my classes as a journalism major, that's the only way it could have happened. And the reason I go back through that is even at the time, like, I was really ashamed of that. I was really feeling that I'd let him down because of how much of an impact he had on me personally, how much I needed a presence like that, where a lot of those issues were pressures from a lot of things around me, and where I expected that the most from him, I received some grace. And it was already shared about how impactful it was to be invited over to his home, and that was especially impactful for me, coming here from 4.5 hours away, not really knowing anyone, where at the time it seemed everyone knew a lot about the cities, and I was kind of from this area. I learned that the best way to make a s'more is with Thin Mints instead of graham crackers. If he didn't teach you that, he should have. It's amazing. I tell people that all the time. And just an empty feeling of, you know, grateful that I was able to get through school like that, but wanting to repay that, wanting to honor that, just wanting him to know, and he never made me feel that way, but wanting him to know that it wasn't taken for granted, that it wasn't taken advantage of. And what a journalism major with a 2.57 graduating in 2011, which wasn't especially kind to journalists, does in that situation is works at Northwestern. So I was hired on in the campus store, so I was able to kind of continue that and still be able to see him even after graduation. And the next year I was in admissions. And by my quick calculation, during my 4 years as a traditional admission counselor, I had admitted about 375 students. In my 1.5 years as a PSEO counselor, I don't even know those numbers, a couple thousand. But whether, you know, I can absolutely guarantee all, you know, 400 and all those students, you sit down with them, you talk to them, there's a recruitment process at some point, and every single one of those students heard about the kindness of Northwestern. They heard about very, very specifically how faculty will not treat you like a number, how they will listen to your problems, how they will be an impact in your life, how they will invite you into their homes, how they will make you feel that you matter during a time where there are a lot of other stresses. And whether students came or not, that was a part of my Northwestern speech for the last 6 years of recruitment that I took to every corner of Northwest Minnesota, to North Dakota, to Colorado, to anyone who would listen, to anyone who wanted to know about my time at Northwestern, parents, people that is part of my testimony, you know, all of that. And so what I was able to to really share with him. It was during a time where the communication department was shuffling a few things, and it looked like he was maybe going to be done here at Northwestern. And I had entered a grad school program, an MBA, which is something I would have said was absolutely stupid for me to do at any other point in my life. But I'd like to say I matured, but only in very small ways at that point. But I was just about a year into it, doing a lot better, just knowing that. And one of my main motivations for that was just to let him know that all of that wasn't wasted, and just to let him know that all of the hospitality, all of the grace, all of that went far beyond me, even though I never worked a day as a journalist, that those lessons were heard and that was passed on. So thanks for sticking with me in that. But I just feel it's an important piece that if you were his best students, you probably didn't see from him because you didn't need to. But for the rest of us, that was extremely impactful.
Hi, my name is Jenny Collins. I was a student here. I was a transfer student, and Doug was my professor and advisor when I started out as a journalism major. And after about a year, I decided I wanted to expand and added public relations. And so he wasn't my advisor then, but I was still on the column office. And as everyone has shared here, Doug was a teacher, a professor, and so much more. He was so good at fathering in terms of helping unpack the treasures that were in us, that we didn't know were there. And one story for me was, I knew I loved writing, and so when I came to Northwestern, I did not know what I wanted to major in. And I thought, well, I looked at the list, and I finally just landed on journalism. I was like, okay, let's go with that. And so in my first class, I still had this, question, what am I going to, major in? But it was sort of my test with Doug. And first class, I definitely landed and went, this is my tribe. This is who I'm supposed to be with, like fellow wordsmiths, and Doug, especially with his humor. And I won't forget just how much Doug could hold things in tension and be able to bring that balance, which I think, as you referenced with his Facebook page, he was doing that up until the day he passed for bringing balance to us. But I remember one of our first assignments that we did in class was to write our own obituaries. And so even from the beginning, Doug was able to hold humor and death in tension for all of us, and to realize that death does not need to be devoid of humor. And so I want to honor Doug today with that, and just being able to honor his wit and his intelligence, and so much more. There's so many stories I could share, but I will leave it at that.
Hello, I'm Rachel, and I just graduated, and I actually had a class with Trouten just this last semester, and so it actually started out really well, and we started classes, and I was excited to have a class with him, and I gave him a cough drop on the first day, and he told me he'd give me all A's, so see. But I remember, so he went away for a while, and they were figuring out the diagnosis and all, and he came back, and I was just curious, what do you say? What do you say at these times? And he told us, life is a fatal condition, and I just have a better time frame now. And that really stuck with me. And then just watching this semester as Liz came with him to classes and watching you guys brave this together, and just the strength of your marriage was really beautiful. And I thank you for everything you've been helping out with, and I'm just praying for you and everything in your grief.
Hello, my name is Hannah Higley, but as Trouten and everyone else in the newspaper called me Sports Hannah, because I was a sports editor, and also probably because I changed all the backgrounds on the computers in the newspaper office to pictures of Cam Newton. So that's also how I got that nickname. But just to share a few stories of Doug that were really important to me was I didn't stick as a journalism student. I actually switched to ministry, and during that time of switching through majors and everything, I was also going through, I had a pretty serious concussion and brain injury from a basketball injury, and I was dealing with a lot of anxiety, And it was hard for me to sit through classes. And so when I brought this up to Doug, he treated me like a person and actually cared about who I was and not just another student. And just the kindness that he spoke to me with in such a tough time for me was something that I'll always remember. And then the last thing was, the last time I actually talked to Doug was when I was applying to seminary, actually at Bethel, and we had a conversation about how, Bethel and Northwestern, I was kind of a traitor, and I made a comment to him. I said, yeah, I guess I'm kind of a rebel rouser, and in his wit, he said, it's not rebel rouser, it's rabble rouser, and that doesn't even apply to the situation. So I'm just very thankful for everything that he's done for me, and I'll remember him for the rest of my life. So thank you.
I'm Christine. I was one of Doug's students here. Growing up, ever since I can remember in high school, I always wanted to be a hairstylist, and somehow came to Northwestern, met Doug, decided to do journalism. I'm still not sure how that happened. But I did want to read just a little short thing that I put on my Facebook after Doug passed away. The summer after my sophomore year of college, I received an email from my journalism professor, Doug Trouten, asking if I was interested in being the editor-in-chief of my college's student-run newspaper. I surely thought the email was sent to the wrong person and even replied accordingly. I had always enjoyed the art of writing and storytelling, but this was truly the first open door someone gave me to explore and be challenged within the field of journalism. I remember sitting in Doug's office the summer before school started up again, feeling like I wasn't good enough, and someone else should have been picked instead. He told me he knew my work ethic, and sometimes it takes a consistent and reliable person for the job over the best, because teachability can often times be better than talent. I learned so much during that year because someone believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. Thank you.
So my dad was not he said he wasn't a sentimental type. He was. But for years and years, he always said he wanted this one song played at his funeral. And in recent weeks, made sure that we knew that he really did want this as his one and only request for his funeral, is that we play this song. It's a song by a local group called Poor Baker's Dozen. Dad was a champion of them for many years and got to know them personally, and many of you might know Jeremiah Gamble. He was involved in that group. So this is a song to remind us all that there is more to life and that we will all end up where he is someday.
You're all gonna die. I'm sorry to upset you, but you're all gonna die. It's a one sure thing to look forward to. You get hit by a truck while crossing the street, or get salmonella from a bad piece of meat. It's as simple as that. We're all gonna have to face the fact that we're all going to die, 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 die. Well, you're all gonna die, and what you gonna leave behind when you all gonna die? When you're gone, what will they find? Just a big pile of stuff clutched to your chest. Well, they'll auction it off and just keep the rest. The stuff don't last. When you're gone, it all goes back. It all goes back. When you die, 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 die. So ask why you live life and then try to live like there's a why. You and I will live and we'll die. Die, die.
I don't know how to close after that song. It is good to be together, to remember together, to laugh together, and to honor Doug together. I appreciated, Victoria, your comment about bits and pieces and what we can take from Doug's life and work in our own life, and that those bits and pieces will live within us. And I have two bits and pieces. The bit is that Doug put students first. My name is Ann Sorensen. I am in the communication department. My office is right next door to his. And I saw on a daily basis how Doug would set aside his work or his deadlines and greet a student at his door and give them the time that person needed. The piece that I will take is that he was my department chair for a number of years. And he would say yes to harebrained ideas. And if he couldn't say yes because it was a crazy harebrained idea, he wouldn't say no, but he would ask a question that would make me realize it's a crazy idea. And I hope to say yes to my students and my colleagues, and then I will pray for the brevity and the wisdom to ask the question that will help them say no to that idea on their own. Before I close in prayer, there are refreshments that are following, and please stay. These are not just any refreshments, though. These cookies that are being served are Liz's recipe. They're monster cookies. Liz, we miss Doug in our department, and we also miss your cooking. And my husband misses your cooking because I would take some of the items home in my purse in a Kleenex, and I'd bring it home to David, and he would say, "Is this Liz's?" And it was gone. So please stay for the monster cookies. Let us bow our heads in prayer. O God of all grace, you sent your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ, to bring life and immortality to life. We give you thanks that by his death he destroyed the power of death, and by his resurrection he opens the kingdom of heaven to all believers. Strengthen us in the confidence that because he lives, we shall live also, and that neither death nor life, nor things present, nor things to come, will be able to separate us from your love. We pray these things in the power of your name and your name alone. Amen. Liz, can I take a cookie home for David?